Good morning. I'm Sherman Stanford, and this is Making Sense of the Chaos. Before we begin, I must tell you that I listen to my podcast every day, not because I'm in love with my voice or I think I'm the smartest person in the world and I just love to hear what I have to say, but because I need to be critical of what I have to say and make it better. There's no better purpose in living than to serve God as well as we can with everything that we have. And this is my small way of doing that. But yesterday was horrible, and so I ask your forgiveness. I overloaded my plate. I made the mistake of trying to do too many things, and I ended up losing sight of my priorities, and I really wasn't as prepared as I should have been. I was hurried, rushed, and disorganized. My thoughts were disorderly. I was bouncing all over the place, and even to myself, I didn't seem to make much sense. So if you're back again today, then you are much more forgiving than I have any right to expect, and I thank you. But by God's grace, I'm not going to do that again. By God's grace. I'll try. At any rate, there are 7 fundamental principles that we think establish a sound framework for understanding what's going on in the world all around us. And failure to understand these 7 is going to severely crimp your awareness of what's really going on. And that works itself out in practical ways. Ideas have consequences, practical consequences. If they don't necessarily seem to mean very much when they vary just a little bit from the truth. But it's kind of like driving a golf ball. You know, if you're driving a golf ball, if you're hitting a 100-yard shot and you're 6 feet off your target, that's pretty good because you're 6 feet away from the hole. But the same degree of error, if you're driving that golf ball 100 miles, is going to put you miles away from where you want to be. Or if it's 1,000 miles. But the point, the principle is that any degree of error, if you're trying to set your course for life, which is not 100 yards or 300 yards or 100 miles, but rather 100 years perhaps, any degree of error magnified over time will produce profound error on the other end. And you don't want that. What you want to do is to adhere as closely as possible to the truth that God has presented about himself, about you, about his creation. And you're not going to do that if you don't know what they are. You're not going to. Who do I think I am to tell you what they are? Well, I think I'm somebody that God has given a great sense of curiosity to and who has been unsatisfied with easy answers to all these things and has dug deeper and deeper and deeper to try to understand better and better and better. Now, how well do I really understand? Way less than I should, but way better than I would had I not struggled to understand as well as I have. So I'm going to pass along what I understand. You take it for what you think it's worth. But I'm not going to apologize for what I think I understand because I think what I understand is true. If somebody will explain to me how anything that I think I understand to be true is not true, then I'll change. Because I'm not going to continue to believe in something that I don't believe in. That's not going to happen. Anyway, those 7 truths are, first of all, God created the cosmos for his glory, not for man's. That's from Isaiah 43:7. Second, the jewel of creation is mankind, which includes women, of course. And when I use the term man or mankind, I'm not trying to be misogynistic. I'm just trying to be consistent with the way the Bible portrays things and the way we have traditionally done so. Why would we muddle our thinking by political correctness? It tends to drift us away from the truth anyway. Third, although in no sense the author of evil, God ordained Adam's fall. It didn't just happen. God didn't throw up his hands in dismay and say, oh my, look what we have to deal with now. No. Okay? And that's what we're going to be talking about today when we talk about God's providence. And that means his predestination. and the importance of that concept. It's right here. Okay? Fourth, in Adam, the entire creation fell, including not only all human beings living and then to come, but the physical creation as well. Fifth, as a result of the fall, God pronounced a curse of enmity between two great divisions of humanity, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. That's playing itself out now. It plays itself out every day of your life. The seed of the serpent is Adam, fallen Adam, Satan, all of Adam's progeny that God has not removed from the seed of the serpent into the seed of the woman. The seed of the woman is Jesus Christ and all those in him. This is known as the great antithesis. The sixth great truth is that all human experience following the great antithesis, the fall of Adam and the curse pronounced by God of enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, all of human history is an outworking of that enmity, of that antithesis. And if we play that down, what we do is we deceive ourselves and we disarm ourselves from dealing with the hostility the other side feels toward us. It is of no value. When you go to war, it's a pretty good idea to know who the enemy is. And if you're a Christian, you cannot overlook the fact that you're at war. The Apostle Paul uses martial, militant figures, symbols. He talks about the breastplate of righteousness and the sword of truth. He talks about running the race, fighting the good fight. We have Christian hymns, Onward Christian Soldier. Okay? He says the bastions of the enemy, the fortresses of the enemy will not prevail against us. The gates of the enemy, all of these are martial symbols indicating we're at war, and we are. Okay, we're soldiers of Christ. Fundamental fact. Seventh, the unregenerate, the seed of the serpent, those who die unrepentant, know God. They have no excuse. They suppress the truth about God in unrighteousness. They exchange the truth of God for a lie. They worship and serve other men, themselves, birds, animals, and creeping things. They do not worship and serve God, though he has made himself plain to them. Now, we're discussing the Reformation, which is a major watershed event in the history of humanity and God's unfolding plan. And the truths that came at great price, at a great struggle by the reformers, remain truths. And the fact that we're losing a lot of those truths today does not make them less true. It makes us less true. Okay? One of the things that we have been talking about is predestination. Why make a big deal out of predestination? Well, if you have a God who doesn't predestine everything, who doesn't know the end from the beginning, as God says he does, if you believe in a God who does not know the end from the beginning, as God says he does, if you believe in a God who does not work everything out according to his own purpose, that is, he does not have a plan that he's unfolding and that he is in charge of and he's seeing to every detail of, then you don't worship the God of the Bible. Okay? Now, if you don't worship that God, then you worship some other God. And that God does not know the end from the beginning. He is not in charge of everything that's happening. And you're left in a world that's controlled by, who knows what? Fate, chance, Satan, who knows? And you're tossed to and fro. And what happens? How can you possibly know? So then you try to get a voodoo doll or some other way of controlling the spirits. Or you understand, there are consequences to whether you believe that God is a predestinating God or you do not. It is a fundamentally significant issue, fundamentally important. It will determine the trajectory of your life, your children's lives, and of the culture that we live in, and of the ultimate course of humanity. Now, I know how it's going to turn out. I don't know how it's going to turn out in your life, but I know how it's going to turn out in God's plan. So either you conform your life to God's plan, you think God's thoughts after him, you try to understand who he is according to his word, or you don't. But if you don't, you will reap the consequences of your bad ideas. Good ideas have good consequences. Bad ideas have bad consequences. So if you deny God's predestination, here are some of the bad consequences that you're going to have in your life. They're going to come. They're all over the place. First, if God is not a predestinating God, then he's not an omnipotent God. He doesn't have all power. Okay? I mean, it's obvious. If he's not in charge of everything, then whatever is happening by some power that he's not in control of. That means he doesn't have all power. I mean, duh, if I have all of anything, then there's nothing outside of the all that I have. But if there's some power outside of God's power, then he doesn't have all power. How complicated can this be? Am I stupid? Is that what's happening? Because, I mean, maybe that's just it. Maybe I'm missing the point. But this seems so simple. This is mathematics, all right? You draw a circle and you say, all of whatever exists in this circle. All right. Now, what can exist outside that circle of whatever you just discussed? Nothing. Because you just by definition said all of whatever exists in this circle. Well, if all power exists within God, then there is no power outside of his control. All power is held by God. Everything is in God's control. Those two things mean exactly the same thing. So if you deny that God predestines everything that's going to happen, whatever that might mean in your life, if you deny that, you have to understand that you're destroying the idea of his omnipotence. Well, how does that matter? Well, because then you live in a world that God can't tell you what's going to happen. He can't control what's going to happen because there are things happening outside of his power. Outside of his power means outside of his control. And if you're living in that world, with just one toe in that world, you're introducing doubt, you're introducing mistrust. This is very, very significant. Now, the issue over which men most strenuously insist on denying God's omnipotence because they want to insist that man's sovereign free will reigns in this area is the issue over salvation itself. Do men decide on choosing God and then he is obligated to save them? Or does God change people's hearts, give them eyes to see, ears to hear, and a mind to understand his truth, after which, of course, they see and they hear and they understand, and their hearts are changed? Which is it? Which comes first? Is it God, the chicken, or is it you, the egg? Which comes first? Because it makes all the difference in the world. All right, imagine this, just for a moment. Imagine that you're God, and that you have decided, I mean, it's you, the Father, you, the Son, you, the Holy Spirit, and you've decided that you want to demonstrate all of your magnificence by creating a cosmos. Okay? You want to demonstrate all your magnificence. Included in your magnificence is your holiness, your vengeance, your wrath, and your justice. Okay? Those are all included in your magnificence. Those are your attributes because you are the God of the Bible. Also included is your mercy and your love and your grace. All right? How are you going to demonstrate that? How are you going to demonstrate that? Well, obviously, you need to have creatures who sin, against which you can show your wrath, which highlights your holiness. The degree of your wrath is in direct proportion to your holiness, because you're holy, which means sinless. When people sin against you, you bring your wrath against that sin as a demonstration of your holiness. You also need sinners to demonstrate your justice, because they justly deserve your vengeance and your wrath. Now you're demonstrating your justice. Okay? So you need sinners to do that. How are you going to demonstrate your love and your mercy and your grace? Once again, you need sinners. And you need to be pulling these sinners out of the abyss of their sin, okay? To show that you are merciful toward them, that you are directing your wrath against your own son instead of against them who deserve it, and you're graciously granting them his righteousness, his holiness, so that they can come into your presence. Now you have created a world that can demonstrate your attributes in full. But if in that world, man's free will decisions determine whether they're saved or not, then man's free will decisions will determine whether you can fulfill your very purpose, demonstrating your own attributes to your glory, is fulfilled in your creation. Now, if men have free will decisions about whether to choose God or not, then it is at least possible that all those men making free will, and I remember a free will decision, according to Arminians and humanists, which is another way of saying the same thing, cannot be controlled by God. Okay? Well, if they're not controlled by God, then he cannot know what they'll decide. Okay? If he doesn't know what they'll decide, they could all decide against him, in which case he's thwarted in the very greatest purpose. I mean, his most ineffable and glorious attributes are, in fact, his grace and his mercy. Isn't that what you believe? If he can't show his grace and his mercy because no one chooses him, then he is defeated at the very point of his reason for creating everything. It makes no sense. If you reject God's sovereignty over the issue of man's salvation, then slowly but surely you will reject every other aspect of God. It may take generations, and it does. There are many people who are Arminians and remain faithful Christians throughout their lives, and their children remain faithful Christians throughout their lives. But sooner or later, once you've introduced the canker into your soul, into the soul of Christian thought, that canker continues to eat away and ultimately will destroy all truth. A lie cannot exist in harmony with the truth. It cannot. One of them must prevail over time. Of course, most critics of predestination, most Arminians, do not admit that they deny God's omnipotence. Okay? They don't. They're going to talk about having an omnipotent and sovereign God, but their omnipotent, sovereign God does not have all power, and he does not have all sovereignty. And so they're speaking out of both sides of their mouths, and when you do that, you look like this. Okay? No, he cannot be omnipotent and not have all power. He cannot be sovereign and not have his own will work out in every case. He cannot. Sovereignty is not something that can be shared. It's not. You cannot have two sovereigns. How do two sovereigns resolve an impasse between them when they disagree? You can't have two sovereigns in a marriage. You can't have two sovereigns in the church. You can't have two sovereigns over what God has to say. You can't have the church and God and his word at odds with one another. You cannot. There's only one sovereign power at a time. Only one. Only one. You can't have two. And so, logically, it is inescapable that in denying predestination, this most abominable doctrine for so many Christians, they at least implicitly deny God's omnipotence. Over the course of sufficient time, in response to challenges posed to their logical position, opponents of predestination will inevitably become either increasingly explicit in their denial of God's omnipotence, or they will abandon their opposition to predestination altogether. Okay? That's because ideas in conflict are never quiescent. Inevitably, under the pressure of life, minds in conflict with themselves are forced by their need for logical consistency toward resolution in favor of one pole or the other of the contradiction. They will not halt between these two opinions. Okay? Ideas held in contradiction either create friction because they're bumping heads, they're colliding with one another, or they create tension as they pull against one another. Now, simple physics tells you that you cannot have a situation of increasing friction or increasing tension forever. Sooner or later, the immovable force, the unstoppable force, will defeat what it's pushing against, or the unstoppable force will pull against what it's pulling against and pull it toward it. One is gonna win. They don't remain in tension forever. When the friction or tension rises to intolerable levels, it must be resolved. Those ideas we value more will inevitably then defeat those ideas we value less. But contradictory ideas will not remain forever in a condition of unresolved friction or tension in the minds of men. Jesus himself tells us that a house divided against itself cannot stand. The practical effect of undermining God's omnipotence is felt especially in the lives of believers. When we go to God in prayer, we either believe that God may be trusted to answer our prayers, or we do not. Okay, it's one way or the other. Once you lose the idea that God can in fact answer your prayers, I mean, if he's not in control of everything, how is he going to answer your prayers? I mean, he can tell you, look, I'm doing the best I can. You know, stuff happens. I'm doing the best I can. All right? Now, what's the second effect of denying predestination? What about God's omniscience? Can he know everything and not determine the outcome of everything? Well, sure, he can know everything. How? Well, he looks forward in time. Okay, so he looks forward in time and he sees things developing that he did not decree. That means he made the universe and he doesn't know how it's all going to turn out. So he looks forward in time and he says, oh, look at this. This is what's going to happen. So he's learning something. Now, how do you have an omniscient God learning something? Whatever he's learning, he did not know. Am I missing something here? All right. How is it when you go to class, you learn things? It's because before you went to class, you did not know that thing. Am I right? So when you learn the thing, now you know something you did not know because you're not omniscient. But when you went to that classroom, you were omniscient already. Are you going to learn anything new? Let me guess. No, you won't, because you're omniscient. Words have meanings. Omniscient means you know everything, past, present, and future, all at the same time. That's what it means. Well, I don't like that meaning. Well, good. Then tell me now, how can you have a God who knows the end from the beginning, who does not know everything in between? How? Does not the end result from all the things that happened between the beginning and itself? I mean, your life where it is today is not the result of countless decisions of yours, decisions of other people, events happening that you could not possibly have known from the beginning, but which combined have shaped you into being who you are now. Is that not true? Which of those events can have been removed from your life and you still would be who you are now? None. Now, if God knew you from before the earth was hung in space, which you did he know? Did he know the you that was in seed form before the earth was hung in space, but he doesn't know you now because he didn't know what all those events were going to be? Well, that's nonsense. He knew all of you. He knew you not only from the beginning before you even existed, but he knew all the things that were going to happen to you, all the things you were going to learn and become throughout your life until your life is over. He knew all of that, and he knows it all into infinity. Well, how can that be? Oh, well, let me guess. Because he's omniscient. He's God. Okay? Well, that's what omniscience means. Well, if he doesn't predestinate everything, then he doesn't know everything. Because if he knows it, it cannot happen any other way but the way that he knows it. Otherwise, he doesn't know it. Okay? If I tell you that that I know how tall the Empire State Building is, it's 1,454 feet tall. And you Google it and find out it's 1,453 feet tall. Did I know how tall the Empire State Building was? No. I didn't know. I thought I knew, and I was close, but I didn't know. Now, so is God close? Does he think he knows, but he doesn't really know? Or does he know everything exactly? That's your choice. Because if he doesn't know everything exactly, now you're thrown back on fate or chance. Things just happen. God's doing the best he can, wringing his hands on the sidelines. Oh, I'm so anxious about my poor children down there. What's going to happen to them? Really? Really? This is the God that you believe the Bible teaches? No. No. Well, if you don't want to have a predestinating God, you can't have an omniscient God. You can't have an omnipotent God. You can't have an omniscient God. What else can you not have? How about an immutable God? Can you have an immutable God, a God who never changes? Well, if he's a predestinating God, then he can be immutable. He's laid everything out. It's going to work out exactly the way that he said it would. And all of this is according to his character, which never changes. And we get great comfort from that because we know that whatever he says, we can trust it. We can believe in. It's going to happen the way he said it will. A man's word is his bond. God, as the exemplar for how to be, is his word is his bond. That's why we try to make our word our bond, because that's true of him. But if we have a mutable, a changeable God, rather than an immutable God, what happens to all of our assurance about anything that he said? Not only about things that he said that we don't like. We don't mind if he changes his mind about those things. But what about things that we do like? What about the assurance of our own salvation? You want him to change his mind about that? What about whether Jesus died on the cross to pay the sins for you? What about, I don't know, any of his other promises? Take your pick. In the same way, God's immutability, his being the same yesterday, today, and forever, and never changing. We get that from Malachi 3:6 and Hebrews 13:8, among other places, and it's all over the place. Must fall victim to the denial of his predestining providence. Again, although opponents of predestination would generally prefer not to be thought to deny God's immutability, especially considering the clear scriptural pronouncements consistent with his immutability, they are nevertheless logically forced to choose, at least tacitly, between accepting his immutability and denying his predestining sovereignty. It's one or the other. You can't have both. You can't have both. Okay, so if you want an immutable God, one who doesn't change, you have to have a sovereign God who predestines everything. You can't, there's no in between. You can't say, well, we just don't understand that. In some way that we can't understand, he's both mutable and he can be trusted. Well, that's like saying, well, in some way, truth is a lie. Well, if some way words can mean two different things that oppose each other, that contradict one another, then you've just destroyed your own belief system in some way. Duh. We're rational creatures. Can we understand God fully? Can we understand his immutability fully? Can we understand his sovereignty fully? Can we understand his predestinating omniscience and omnipotence and immutability fully? No. Well, does that mean that we shouldn't try to understand them as well as we can? Well, of course not. Okay? Do you understand fully anything in your life? Let me guess. No. Do you understand yourself fully? No. Do you spend every day of your life trying to understand yourself better? Yes. Should you try to understand yourself better? Well, yes. Well, if you can't understand yourself fully, why should you try to understand yourself better? Well, that's stupid. What a stupid question. Okay? So when people act like, well, because you can't understand God and his attributes fully, don't try to understand them at all. Or don't try to understand them too much. I mean, you can get yourself into some logical log jams if you're not careful. No. It makes just as much sense as not trying to understand yourself, because you may end up having to see some contradictions in your behavior that you don't want to look at. Well, whether you want to look at them or not, they're there and they're going to create what they create. Better you should find them and fix them so they don't create the evil that they would. And listen, it'll be evil, believe me. If God is ever imagined as facing situations in which he does not know the outcome of events in advance, then it necessarily follows that he cannot with certainty announce his plan regarding those events and bring that plan to a certain fruition. Unexpected contingency will force change to accommodate the unexpected contingency. Therefore, his immutability must be relinquished at least tacitly, if not overtly. Once that is done, there's no logical basis in reason to speak of God's having a plan of any kind. So then we hear people saying, well, and I'm always befuddled by it. I get cross-eyed in my head when I hear people say this. They'll tell somebody, oh, well, you understand, everything happens for a reason. Well, that may be true, but that's not necessarily a comforting thought. If everything is happening for a reason and the reason is because God wants to dump on your head, I'm not sure that's very comforting. There's a reason, but that's not necessarily the same thing as saying everything happens for your good. Okay? That's a sort of bastardization of Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purposes. Well, that's fine. That's true. And that's a good thing. It gives me great comfort every day of my life. But to tell me there's a reason everything happens. Everything happens for a reason. Well, sure, it happens for a reason. But the reason might be that God hates me and he's spitting on me. I mean, I'm supposed to gain comfort from that? That's nonsense. As human beings, we make plans based upon our best appraisals of situations, taking into account, I'm sorry, we've gone way over time, haven't we?
All right.
I got so involved. Well, I apologize once again, but this time I was actually into what I was talking about. And I pray your indulgence. Pray you have a great day today. It was 64 degrees yesterday morning, 64 degrees this morning, the 27th and the 28th of May in South Louisiana. That's wonderful. By the way, the 28th of May is the 48th anniversary of my leaving the U.S. to go spend the summer hitchhiking through Europe when I was just a young guy. And as I look back on it, I think I must have been insane. I went all by myself. Well, I went with a large group that went together, but they were unconnected. Okay, it was a group from my college, but we didn't go together in the sense of we were all planning to spend time together. No, we just all went on the same flight over, and we all came back on the same flight coming back. But for the 2.5 months I was in Europe, I was on my own, and I hitchhiked through Europe, and it was just an absolutely wonderful experience. And I was too stupid to even be scared. Anyway, God bless you today. And remember, there are more things to fear than death. And the worst is to fear dishonoring God by being unfaithful to him. So keep that, put that in your pipe and smoke it, as my mama used to say. Have a great day.